Namaste, Dandavat Pranam. By the instruction and grace of our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad, Paramahamsa Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, we're here reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 3, the Status Quo, Chapter 25, Text 13. Sri Bhagavanu Vacha Yogadhyati Mika Pumsham Mato Nihishrayasyame Atyanto Paratir Yatra Dukasya Cha Shukasya Cha. The personality of Godhead answered, the yoga system which relates to the Lord and the individual soul, which is meant for the ultimate benefit of the living entity, and which causes detachment from all happiness and distress in the material world, is the highest yoga system. Purport. The material world, everyone is trying to get some material happiness. But as soon as we get some material happiness, there's also material distress. In the material world, one cannot have unadulterated happiness. Any kind of happiness one has is contaminated by distress also. For example, if we want to drink milk when we have to bother to maintain a cow and keep her fit to supply milk, drinking milk is very nice. It is also pleasure. But for the sake of drinking milk, one has to accept so much trouble. The yoga system, as here stated by the Lord, is meant to end all material happiness and material distress. The best yoga, as taught in Bhagavad Gita by Krishna, is Bhakti Yoga. It is also mentioned in the Gita that one should try to be tolerant and not be disturbed by material happiness or distress. Of course, one may say that he is not disturbed by material happiness, but he does not know that just after one enjoys so-called material happiness, material distress will follow. This is the law of the material world. Lord Kapila states that the yoga system is the science of spirit. One practices yoga in order to attain perfection in the spiritual platform. There is no question of material happiness or distress. It is transcendental. Lord Kapila will eventually explain how it is transcendental, but the preliminary introduction is given here. Text 14. Tam imam te pravakshami yam avocham puranage rishinam shrotu kamanam yogam sarvanga naipunam. O most pious mother, I shall now explain to you the ancient yoga system, which I explained formerly to the great sages. It is serviceable and practical in every way. Purport. The Lord does not manufacture a new system of yoga. Sometimes it is claimed that someone has become an incarnation of God and is expounding a new theological aspect of the absolute truth. But here we find that although Kapila Muni is the Lord himself and is capable of manufacturing a new doctrine for his mother, he nevertheless says, I shall just explain the ancient system which I once explained to the great sages, because they were also anxious to hear about it. When we have the super excellent process already present in Vedic scriptures, there is no need to concoct a new system to mislead the innocent public. At present, it has become a fashion to reject the standard system and present something bogus in the name of a newly invented process of yoga. Text 15. Chekta kalvasya bandhaya muktaye chatmano matam guneshu shaktam bandhaya ratam vapumshi muktaye. The stage in which the consciousness of the living entity is attracted by the three modes of material nature is called conditional life. But when that same consciousness is attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in the consciousness of liberation. Purport. There is a distinction here between Krishna consciousness and Maya consciousness, between Krishna consciousness and Maya consciousness. Guneshu, or Maya consciousness, involves attachment to the three material modes of nature, under which one works sometimes in goodness and knowledge, sometimes in passion, and sometimes in ignorance. These different qualitative activities, with the central attachment for material enjoyment, are the cause of one's conditional life. When the same chitta, or consciousness, is transferred to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, or when one becomes Krishna conscious, he is on the path of liberation. 16. Aham mamha bhimanotahi kama lobhadi bhirmalai vitam yada manashudham adhukam ashukam samam. When one is completely cleansed of the impurities of lust and greed produced from the false identification of the body as I and bodily possessions as mine, one's mind becomes purified. In that pure state, he transcends the stage of so-called material happiness and distress. Purport. Kama and lobha are symptoms of material existence. Everyone always desires to possess something. It is said here that desire and greed are the products of false identification of oneself with the body. When one becomes free from this contamination, then his mind and his consciousness also become freed and attain their original state. Mind, consciousness, and the living entity exist. Whenever we speak of the living entity, this includes the mind and consciousness. The difference between conditional life and liberated life occurs when we purify the mind and the consciousness. When they are purified, one becomes transcendental to material happiness and distress. In the beginning, Lord Kapila had said that perfect yoga enables one to transcend the platform of material distress and happiness. How this can be done is explained here. One has to purify his mind and consciousness. This can be done by the Bhakti Yoga system. As explained in the Narada Pancharatra, one's mind and senses should be purified. Tat paratvena nirmalam. One's senses must be engaged in devotional service to the Lord. That is the process. The mind must have some engagement. One cannot make the mind vacant. Of course, there are some foolish attempts to try to make the mind vacant or void, but that is not possible. The only process that will purify the mind is to engage it in Krishna. The mind must be engaged. If we engage our mind in Krishna, naturally the consciousness becomes fully purified, and there is no chance of the entrance of material desire and greed. 17. Tadha purusha atmanam kevalam prakrite param nirantaram swayam jyotir animanam akanditam. At that time, the soul can see himself to be transcendental to material existence and always self-effulgent, never fragmented, although very minute in size. Purport. In the state of pure consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, one can see himself as a minute particle, non-different from the Supreme Lord. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, the jiva, or the individual soul, is eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Just as the sun's rays are minute particles of the brilliant constitution of the sun, so a living entity is a minute particle of the Supreme Spirit. The individual soul and the Supreme Lord are not separated as in material differentiation. The individual soul is a particle from the very beginning. One should not think that because the individual soul is a particle, it is fragmented from the whole spirit. Mayavad philosophy enunciates that the whole spirit exists, but a part of it, which is called the jiva, is entrapped by illusion. This philosophy, however, is unacceptable because spirit cannot be divided like a fragment of matter. That part, the jiva, is eternally apart. As long as the Supreme Spirit exists, his part and parcels also exist. As long as the sun exists, the molecules of the sun's rays also exist. The jiva particle is estimated in the Vedic literature to be more than 1/10,000th the size of the upper portion of a hair. It is therefore infinitesimal. The Supreme Spirit is infinite, but the living entity, or the individual soul, is infinitesimal. Although it is not different in quality from the Supreme Spirit, two words in this verse are to be particularly noted. One is nirantaram, which means non-different, of the same quality. The individual soul is also described here as animan, animanam. Animanam means infinitesimal. The Supreme Spirit is all-pervading, but the very Spirit is the individual soul. Akhanditam means not exactly fragmented, but constitutionally always infinitesimal. No one can separate the molecular parts of the sunshine from the sun, but at the same time, the molecular part of the sunshine is not as expansive as the sun itself. Similarly, the living entity, by his constitutional position, is qualitatively the same as the Supreme Spirit, but he is infinitesimal. Text 18. Jnana vairagya yuktena bhakti yuktena chatmana haripasyat yudhishinam prakritim cha hatojasam. In that position of self-realization by practice of knowledge and renunciation in devotional service, one sees everything in the right perspective. He becomes indifferent to material existence, and the material influence acts less powerfully upon him. Purport. As the contamination of the germs of a particular disease can influence a weaker person, similarly the influence of material nature or illusory energy can act on the weaker or conditioned soul, but not on the liberated soul. Self-realization is the position of the liberated state. One understands his constitutional position by knowledge and vairagya, renunciation. Without knowledge, one cannot have realization. The realization that one is the infinitesimal part and parcel of the Supreme Spirit makes him unattached to material conditional life. That is the beginning of devotional service. Unless one is liberated from material contamination, one cannot engage himself in the devotional service of the Lord. In this verse, it is therefore stated, Jnana vairagya yuktena, when one is in full knowledge of one's constitutional position and is in the renounced order of life, detached from material attraction. Then, by pure devotional service, bhakti yuktena, he can engage himself as this loving servant of the Lord. Paripasyati means that he can see everything in its right perspective. Then the influence of the material nature becomes almost nil. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Brahmabhuta prasanatma. When one is self-realized, he becomes happy and free from the influence of the material nature. And at that time, he is freed from lamentation and hankering. The Lord states that position as mad bhaktim labate param, the real state of beginning devotional service. Similarly, it is confirmed in the Narada Pancharatra that when the senses are polluted, or when the senses are purified, they can be engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. One who is attached to material contamination cannot be a devotee. And thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 19 on Wednesday. Jai Am Vishnupad Paramahamsa Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Gurudev, Srila Acharya Dev, Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the worldwide devotees. Sama Bhakti Veda Vrinda Ki Jai. Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Nishingapali Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Baladi Subhadra Jagannath Ju Ki Jai. Gangamayi Yamuna Mayi Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari 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 Bol Jai. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Jai Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute ki jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Institute ki jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mat ki jai. Hare Krishna.